Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolutely fascinating dialectic pendulum in human history, that constant back and forth swing between offensive and defensive military power. We usually just think of gunpowder as the tech that blew up castle walls, right? But why exactly did gunpowder so completely change 16th century warfare? Well, as we're going to see today, it didn't just break walls down, it literally rebuilt the modern world, accidentally shaping the very borders and sovereign states we recognize today. Let's kick things off with a reaction from a contemporary historian, Francesco Guicciardini. He was responding to the 1494 invasion of Italy by French King Charles VIII. Now, what you need to know is that this invasion was an absolute shock to the system. People at the time immediately recognized that Charles's mobile artillery didn't just win a few battles. It totally disrupted the status quo. It was a complete transformation of warfare.
Section 1. The Gunpowder Disruption and the Offensive Swing.
What's truly staggering here is just how fast a centuries-old sense of security was totally shattered. I mean, for hundreds of years, if you had high stone walls, you were pretty much safe. But just think about this rapid progression. In 1453, the supposedly impenetrable double walls of Constantinople finally fall to massive Ottoman cannons. Then, jumping to 1494, Charles VIII sweeps through Italy with a highly mobile siege train of bronze cannons, firing iron shot. These guns reduced mighty fortresses to rubble in days, not months. The panic was immediate, and it led directly to the 1530s, where we start seeing the first complete, radical architectural solutions. The offensive advantage had suddenly become completely overwhelming. But here's the catch. This new offensive power was an absolute logistical nightmare. 17, that is the number of draft horses it took just to pull a single 24-pounder siege cannon back then. They were incredibly unwieldy. They chewed through tremendous amounts of gunpowder. And the recoil? It was so wildly violent that a cannon could literally roll back 5 to 6 meters after a single shot. Yet, even with these massive headaches and maddening inefficiencies, their sheer destructive power made them absolutely indispensable. The architectural flaw of the era became instantly obvious. You see, the medieval castle was built on a really simple premise. Height is good. High, thin masonry walls made climbing hard, and round towers deflected arrows. But against horizontal, perpendicular cannon fire, that exact height became a fatal flaw. It was a massive, fragile target that crumbled under impact. Plus, if attackers got right up to the base of those round towers, the defenders couldn't point their guns down far enough to hit them. It created these massive, dangerous blind spots. So, a total reimagining of architecture was urgently needed.
Which brings us to Section 2, the rise of the Star Fort and the defensive response.
So the real game changer here is a specific concept called the trace Italienne, which we usually just call the Star Fort. This is the ultimate defensive answer to the gunpowder revolution. Instead of trying to build higher, engineers went lower, and they went wider, relying on some really brilliant complex geometry. And it was a sensation. It spread like wildfire across Europe as rulers scrambled to protect their lands.
The initial panic really kicked off in the Italian city-states. Italian architects and engineers were at the absolute cutting edge of this experimentation starting in the 1470s. They were frantically prototyping new designs, desperately trying to dampen the catastrophic impact of this terrifying new artillery. Moving into Section 3, the anatomy of the bastion and its microengineering. It all started with something incredibly simple but absolute genius: the glacis. Instead of exposing a giant tall wall, engineers dug a ditch and piled up a gently sloping screen of earth in front of it. By sinking the main walls behind this earthen slope, they completely neutralized the horrific battering power of the cannon. The cannonballs would just bury themselves harmlessly into the dirt. Problem solved.
And then they used brilliant geometry to build a flawless defensive system. They swapped out those old round towers for angular, diamond-shaped points. Why? Because an oblique angle deflects a cannon shot way better than a flat surface. This new layout entirely wiped out those blind spots that plagued the old medieval castles. If attacking infantry actually managed to get close, the fort's ditches and mutually supporting walls basically funneled them into carefully designed kill grounds, where defenders could just wipe them out with interlocking fields of fire.
This specific arrowhead layout, the bastion, was so incredibly successful at restoring the balance of power that it became the absolute gold standard for the next 300 years. Just like that, defense was dominant once again. All right, Section 4, the return of sieges and how warfare bogged down.
As warfare ground to a halt around these massive new fortresses, the armies themselves had to transform. The introduction of firearms caused a massive socioeconomic shift. Think of it as an early modern Taylorism. Combat was broken down into simple, repetitive, mechanical steps. Load the musket, fire the musket, handle the pike. And this completely changed the social fabric of the 16th century. You no longer needed to be nobility or have a lifetime of elite training as a knight to be lethal on the battlefield. Thanks to printed manuals, warfare became highly systematized.
Think about this time frame: 6 weeks. That is all the time it took to train a minimally competent soldier to use an early musket or an arquebus. Because of this rapid diskilling, states could suddenly generate massive, improvised armies out of nowhere. Soldiers were easier to recruit, way cheaper to maintain, and much easier to replace after a defeat.
But here's the thing. When you combine these massive, cheap armies with the practically impregnable star forts we just talked about, the result is horrific gridlock. Wars devolved into incredibly expensive, painfully protracted, and totally indecisive sieges. The 30 Years' War degenerated into exactly this, a bloody stalemate of dispersed operations. You had these massive armies slowly marching and countermarching, completely unable to achieve a quick, decisive victory, all while absolutely devastating the civilian populations they were living off of. Which leads us to Section 5, Shaping the Modern State, and a massive political side effect.
You see, the indecisiveness of this new warfare had a massive political side effect. It prevented any single superpower from steamrolling its neighbors. The Habsburgs? Blocked from European mastery by networks of fortresses. The Ottoman Empire, even with its massive manpower, was checked at crucial sieges like Vienna in 1529 and Malta in 1565. And it was exactly this dense fortified belt that allowed the Netherlands to successfully secure its independence from Spain. The micro-engineering of the Star Fort literally ensured the survival of competing territorial states at the macro level. It's kind of wild to think about.
The 18th century historian Edward Gibbon famously argued that gunpowder made civilized peoples secure against barbarians. But we can actually flip that on its head. The technological stalemate of gunpowder actually made Europe safe against anything resembling the Roman Empire. It mathematically prevented the rise of a single monopolistic European superpower. And this brings us to a really profound historical realization. Because armies couldn't just conquer each other into oblivion anymore, they were eventually forced to the negotiating table. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 ended the 30 Years' War, and it initiated the widespread acceptance of mutual recognition and non-interference. Because military technology had created a nearly perfect balance of power, states just had to accept each other's sovereignty. So this era of indecisive warfare directly birthed the modern system of sovereign states that we still live in today. Which leaves us with a final, rather provocative thought. We've seen how the 16th century dialectic pendulum of gunpowder and star forts literally drew the map of the modern world, while today we hear constant talk of a new revolution in military affairs. We're talking drones, cyber warfare, AI. If the unwieldy bronze cannon accidentally birthed the modern state system, what will today's technological revolution build or destroy in the centuries to come? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.